Compassion and Self-Hate, An Alternative to Despair, by Theodore Rubin. If one is cruel to oneself, how can we expect him to be compassionate with others? From Hasdai, Ben Hamalech Vehanazer. Part 1. An Alternative to Despair. This book was inspired by experience with myself and my patients. Some years ago, as a result of what I felt as a great personal failure and consequent severely hurt pride, I suffered a very painful depression. In psychoanalytic treatment, I learned a great deal about myself that I had no previous idea about at all. This included many emotional problems and confusions, as well as much about good human substance too. But despite these quite valid and important insights, my depression and despair went on, and I began to feel that I never really would get better. I became aware that I was, in fact, psychologically beating myself unmercifully. I realized that much of the beating came from a false, perfectionistic, impossibly exalted image of myself. I felt that in falling from this image, I had descended to considerably less than a subhuman status. Despite myself, I could not turn the self-hating machinery off. My nights were particularly terrible. They consisted of either sleepless hours of self-torturing ruminations or were full of nightmares in which I once again saw myself as during periods when I felt most helpless, frightened, and vulnerable as a child. Once again, I relived the humiliating feelings I had when I was left back in the 5th grade. It was as if none of the development, evolving, and growth that had occurred in me since that time had ever happened. Despite myself, I had no mercy for the somewhat confused child I had been and still obviously harbored within myself, and I had even less compassion for the young man I had become. The measure of my right to be was unfortunately based solely on accomplishment. One seeming failure was enough to upset this fragile, tenuous arrangement and to produce an almost incapacitating depression. I was among the most fortunate of people. My wife Ellie never faltered in compassion and love and provided much insight too. My analyst, in addition to other human qualities, was also rich in both a fighting spirit and compassion. He employed both and fought valiantly against my self-hate. We won. One night, after his own uncompromising, compassionate outlook touched me deeply, and I'm sure stirred my own dormant fund of compassion, a radical change took place. Before trying to sleep that night, I decided, not with my head, but rather with my entire being, all my feelings, that I would leave it all be. That I would simply let go, relax, stop berating myself, stop attempting to be in charge, to put it together, simply to let it go, to let be what would be. On a conscious level, I felt as if a great weight had been shifted from my chest. I was suddenly filled with a renewed faith in people, in the human condition, in the world, in nature, and I suppose in all things some people feel as God. But this really represented faith in myself. Myself, all of myself, sick and healthy. This represented both humility and self-acceptance and even more compassion. It felt as though I finally knew that I was indeed smaller than the world that I lived in, and this was humbling, relieving, and good. And I liked myself this way. I could live with my virtues, assets, problems, limitations, and failures, and without either subterfuge or horrendous self-hate. Though I didn't know it at the time, this was the beginning of a compassionate way of life. The battle was joined. That night I slept peacefully. In the morning, my depression was gone. Each of us contains two opposing forces of enormous power and effect. Compassion is the strongest human therapeutic agent in existence. Its potential for constructive growth and human creative possibility is almost limitless. Self-hate is the strongest human anti-therapeutic agent in existence. Its potential for destructive possibility is almost limitless. To date, no culture has produced human beings exempt from this dichotomy. Division of the human psychic structure along this line is universal. Despair is directly proportional to energy and substance used in the service of self-hate. Emotional well-being and relative freedom from destructive inner turmoil are directly proportional to energy and substance used in the service of compassion. To those of us interested in human growth and enhancement of inner peace, it is vital to examine and to understand these forces. This is the only effective way to undermine self-hate, to potentiate compassion, and to reduce internal despair. It is my belief that psychotherapeutic endeavors which neglect this area cannot succeed on a long-term basis. Any relationship, professional or otherwise, that ultimately reduces self-hate and enhances compassion contributes to a long-term and possibly permanent therapeutic effect. This process, in turn, makes self-growth, creativity, and constructive relating possible. We invariably relate better to other people when we relate better to ourselves. The first part of this book is devoted to a discussion of self-hate. In war, it is vital to know the enemy, and even without an iota of conscious awareness, we are all participants in this intrapsychic war. For too many of us, the disastrous outcome is a foregone conclusion. Without the illumination of insight, hopelessness abounds and surrender is inevitable. Living with and nourishing an unseen and unknown but ever-present enemy destroys our inner resources, our vitality, and our spontaneity. This produces emotional strangulation, deadening, loss of feelings, and human despair. The first vital therapeutic step is to recognize and to understand the nature of self-hate. In the middle section of the book, I define and discuss compassion and the compassionate way of life. Compassion, as used in this book and as experienced in one's psychological life, refers to a very active and powerful force which must be understood in this highly specialized context. Some of its ramifications are intricate and complex, but understanding them can be most rewarding and even life-saving. Hopefully, it will aid in the active therapeutic process of reducing self-hate, enhancing compassion, and obliterating despair born of intrapsychic surrender and hopelessness. The alternative is acceptance and growth of real self and a greater capacity for peace and happiness. The final section of the book, on human terms, is devoted to a compassionate reevaluation of our most important destructive cultural values. Understanding and changing these values must reduce self-hate, mutual hate, and ultimately contribute to the construction of a more compassionate society.